Chapter 4, Part C of Greener Than You Think. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Greener Than You Think by Ward Moore. Chapter 4, Part C. In the socialistic orgy of nationalizing business, I was fortunate. Consolidated Pemmican and Allied Concentrates was left in the hands of private initiative. Better than that, it had not been tied down and made helpless by the multiplicity of regulations hampering the few types of endeavor remaining nominally free of regimenting bureaucracy. Opportunity, long prepared for, and not, I trust, undeserved, was before me. In the past to which our country had come, it seemed to me I could be of most service, supplying our armed forces with field rations. Such an unselfish and patriotic desire one would think easy of realization, as I so innocently did, and I immediately began interviewing numberless officers of the quartermaster's department to further this worthy aim. I certainly believe every corporation must have its rules, otherwise executives would be besieged all day by time-wasters. The United States government is surely a corporation, as I always used to say in advocating election of a business administration, and standard procedures and regulations are essential. Still, there ought to be a limit to the number and length of questionnaires to fill out, and the number of underlings to interview before a serious businessman can get to see a responsible official. After making 3 fruitless trips to Washington and getting exhaustively familiar with countless tantalizing waiting rooms, I became impatient. The man I needed to see was a Brigadier General Thario, but after wasting valuable days and hours, I was no nearer reaching him than in the beginning. I had filled out the necessary forms and stated the nature of my business so often, I began to be alarmed lest my hand refuse to write anything else, and I be condemned for the rest of my life to repeat the idiotic phrases called for in the blank spaces. I am afraid I must have raised my voice in expressing my exasperation to the young lady who acted as receptionist and barrier. At any rate, she looked startled, and I think pressed a button on her desk. A pink-faced, white-mustached gentleman came hastily through the door behind her. The jacket of his uniform fitted snugly at the waist, and his bald head was sunburnt and shiny. What's this going on here?" I saw the single star on his shoulder straps and ventured, "General Thario?" He hit his white mustache with a forefinger, pink as his cheeks. Yes, but you must have an appointment to speak to me. That's the rule, you know. Must have an appointment." He appeared extremely nervous and harassed, his eyes darting back to the refuge of his office, but he was evidently held to the spot by whatever distress animated his receptionist. "General Thario," I persisted firmly, "I quite appreciate your viewpoint, but I've been trying for days to get such an appointment with you on a matter of vital concern, and I have been put off every time by what I can only describe as red tape. I'm sorry to say so, General Thario, but I must repeat, red tape." He looked more worried than before, and his eyes ranged over the room for some escape. "Know just how you feel," he muttered. "Know just how you feel. Horrible stuff. Swaddled in it here. Simply swaddled in it. Strangled." He cleared his throat as though to disembarrass it of a garrote. "But, hang it, Mr. Weiner, Albert Weiner, President of Consolidated Pemmican and Allied Concentrates, Incorporated." "Well, you know, Mr. Weiner, man your position. Appreciate absolute necessity, certain amount of routine. Keep the cranks out, otherwise swarming with them, simply swarming. Wartime precautions. Must excuse me now, terribly rushed, glad to have met—" Swallowing the rest of the sentence and putting his hand over his mouth, lest he should inadvertently regurgitate it, he started for his office. "General Thario," I pleaded, "a moment. Consider our positions reversed. I have long since established my identity, my responsibility. I want nothing for myself. I am here doing a patriotic duty. Surely enough of the routine you mention has been complied with to permit me to speak to you for 5 or 10 minutes. Do for one moment as I say, General, and put yourself in my place. Think of the discouragement you as a citizen would feel to be hampered, perhaps more than is necessary." He took his hand down from his mouth and looked at me out of blue eyes so pale as to be almost colorless. "But hang it, you know, Mr. Wiener, highly irregular. Sympathize completely, but consider. Don't like being put in such a position. Why don't you come back in the morning?" "General," I urged, flushed with victory, "give me 10 minutes now." He collapsed. "Know just how you feel. Wanted to be out in the field myself. No desk soldier. Lot of nonsense if you ask me. Come in. Come in." In his office, I explained the sort of contract I was anxious to secure and assured him of my ability to fulfill its terms. But I could see his mind was not intent upon the specifications for field rations. Looking up occasionally from a dejected study of his knees, he kept inquiring in elliptical, practically verbless questions how many men my plant employed, whether I had a satisfactory manager, and if a knowledge of chemistry was essential to the manufacture of concentrates, evading or discussing in the vaguest terms the actual business in hand. However, he seemed very friendly and affable toward me personally, once the chill air of the waiting room had been left behind, and as Button Fleas had advised me insistently to entertain without regard to expense any officials with whom I came in contact, I thought it politic to invite him to dinner. He demurred at first, but at length accepted, instructing his secretary to phone his wife not to expect him home early. I suggested Mrs. Thario join us, but he shook his head, muttering, "No place for women, Mr. Wiener. No place for women." Whether this referred to Washington, or the restaurant where we were going, or to his life largely, was not clear. Wartime Washington was in its usual chaotic turmoil, and it was impossible to get a taxi, so we had to walk. But the General did not seem at all averse to the exercise. It seemed to me he rather enjoyed returning the salutes with the greatest punctilio and flourish. On our way, we came to one of the capital's most famous taverns, and I thought I detected a hesitancy in his stride. Now, I am not a drinking man myself. I limit my imbibing to an occasional glass of beer on account of the yeast it contains, which I consider beneficial. I hope, however, I am no prig or Puritan, and so I asked casually if he would care to stop in for an appetizer. "Well, now you mention it, Mr. Wiener, huh? Fact is, don't mind if I do." While I confined myself to my medicinal beverage, the General conducted a most remarkable raid on the bar. As I have hinted, he was in demeanor a mild-appearing, if not indeed a timid man. In the course of an hour's conversation, no word of profanity, such as is affected by many military men, had crossed his lips. The framed photograph of his wife and daughters on his desk, and his respectful references to women, indicated he was not the type of soldier who lusts for rapine. But seated before that dull mahogany bar, whatever inhibitions, whatever conventional shackles, whatever self-denials and repressions had been inculcated, fell from him swiftly and completely. He barked his orders at the bartender, who seemed to know him very well, as though he were addressing a parade formation of badly disciplined troops. Not only did General Thario drink enormously, but he broke all the rules I had ever heard laid down about drinking. He began with a small, squat glass, which I believe is called an old-fashioned glass, containing half cognac and half rye whiskey. He followed this with a tall tumbler, 12 full ounces, none of your 8-ounce thimbles, not trifled with, of champagne, into which the bartender, upon his instructions and under his critical eye, poured 2 jiggers of tropical rum. Then he wiped his lips with a handkerchief pulled from his sleeve, and began with a serious air on a combination of Benedictine and tequila. The more he imbibed, the longer, more complete, and more coherent his sentences became. He dropped his harassed air. His abdomen receded, his chest expanded, bringing to my notice for the first time the rows of ribbons which confirmed his earlier assertion that he was not a desk soldier. He was sipping curacao, liberally laced with applejack, when he suggested we have our dinner sent in rather than leave this comfortable spot. "The fact of the matter is, Mr. Wiener, I'm going to call you Albert if you don't mind. I said I didn't mind, with all the heartiness at my command. The fact